We are taking our last look at every team's 2024 as a whole before we tick over into 2025. And today it is the Port Adelaide Power. So before we start, remember to like, comment, subscribe. Let us know how you think Port went in 2024. But for now, let's crack in. This season review is brought to you by Skills Beast, the best teaching apparatus to learn how to kick effectively with the correct technique every time. No matter what your age or skill level, Skills Beast will transform your kick. Head to skillsbeast.com to instantly kick better. And to break this all down for me, AFL commentator and analyst Darren Parkin. Darren, I feel like this is a bit of deja vu. Port make the finals in dramatic fashion and then just can't get past that prelim.
Yeah, well, I think it's their fourth preliminary final defeat in the Hinckley reign now, yet to obviously win their way through to a grand final. But, another top four finished second this year, finished the season extremely well, won 8 of their last 9. It's been a bit of a common theme where we've spoken about sides standing up when it matters, and Port were one of those sides that did that. You look at Freo, dropping games late, and the Bulldogs at times, but Port Adelaide, very impressive when it matters most. And with all of the pressure that's been on Ken Hinckley at times, Port Adelaide seem to respond every time that ramps up. So they're clearly buying into that and playing for him. They get the job done when he needs them to get the job done. And if you look at it statistically, they won one less game this year than last year, but were probably a slightly more rounded side. They were ranked 8th for scoring, which is the lowest rank of all of the 8 finalists, but they improved significantly in defence from 12th to 3rd, obviously bringing in a couple of decent players, Radaglia, who ended up having to go forward a little bit towards the end of the year, but they looked a little bit more, I guess, competitive across the board against the better sides. It just fell apart for them in the finals, and that's where it always does. They've lost 5 of their last 6 finals, going back to that Bulldogs prelim in 2021 when they got monstered early. But the one win was full of merit, the Hawthorn game this season.
All right, so heading into 2024, if we go back to the start of the year, they're coming off a year where they've gone out in straight sets again. And what were their expectations coming in? Where would you consider this year a pass?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, if you finish top 4 and make a prelim, you get the pass mark. But if you dig a bit deeper, obviously there's a few things that would worry them a little bit. So last year, top 4, the 2 finals losses were fairly convincing. The Lions got them by about 8 goals, and then the Giants were all over them from quarter time onwards in that semi-final last year. So they didn't really fire a shot, and the critics of Ken Hinckley had been that, his winning record in finals being less than 50%, and obviously inability to get them to a grand final over that length of time, which I think is the longest tenure a coach has held at one club without getting to a grand final. But in saying that, they're always a pretty good side. It feels like when they get to finals, there's 1 or 2 sides that are just a little bit better than them, which is frustrating, but they do a heck of a lot right each year. Mm-hmm. And that they were able to play for him again, get the result over Hawthorn, winning that final, certainly I think helped secure his tenure. And sooner or later they'll break through if they keep persisting the way they are.
Yeah. So you're giving 2024 a pass?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I don't think the Port fans will agree, but, fair enough. That's why you should jump in the comments. So digging a bit deeper into the lowlights for Port Adelaide's year, I think let's start with losing Dan Houston at quite an unfortunate time for them.
Yeah, I mean, he got suspended for 6 weeks or whatever it was in the showdown, so they lost him for the back end of the year, and now they lose him permanently as he goes to Collingwood. He's been an important part of that running brigade for them, so they missed him in the short term, and now they'll miss him in the long term as well. And then you just look at a couple of the other things for them. So as we said, lowest scoring side of all 8 finalists, and there was a bit too much left to, Georgiades kicked, I think, 43 goals or thereabouts, and Rioli kicked mid-30s, and those two were sort of carrying it a bit for them. We saw, Lord burst onto the scene in the finals last year, kicked 4 against Brisbane in the qualifying final. He only played 7 games this year. Charlie Dixon looked to be on his last legs and has ultimately retired. And Todd Marshall, they didn't quite get, when he was there, he missed some games, but when he was there, he didn't quite impact in the way that he has previously. So they just lost a bit out of those guys by comparison to some of the other teams around them in the finals. And the other one would be, that there appears to be a bit of a class gap, maybe depth in like ultimately, if you look at them against Sydney or Brisbane or Geelong, maybe when it matters most, they just don't quite bat as deep as some of those sides, despite the fact that they're squeezing, almost every drop out of them.
All right, taking a look at the highlights for Port this year. There were a few, despite their finals performances. So let's start with their handy-ins that will play a pretty significant role for them in 2025.
Yeah, they won the race for Jack Lukosius from the Crows, and you'll come across in the Suns. He's kicked 5 or more goals in a game 4 times. He's a very handy key position option that can play a number of different roles for them. But we spoke about forward being a bit of an issue for them. Rory Atkins comes across from the Gold Coast, who can potentially offer some good service for them. Joe Richards from Collingwood, a relatively cheap pickup for them. So I think all of those guys will be pretty handy. And the other one would be, I guess, that core midfield group, as much as we spoke a little bit about depth. But, Rosie Butters, Horn Francis, who had a great year, even Ollie Wines have a fair bit of footy left in them. That's even with, Travis Boakes, the conclusion of his journey. But and then if you look at their run to the finals, 8 of their last 9, they won their way in to be one of the form sides of the competition. Defence is what that was built on. And then probably the backs to the wall semi-final win against a Hawthorn side that was absolutely flying. They were coming off a 14-goal loss in a qualifying final. They really had to dig deep to win that, and they did, and they deserved to win that on the basis of the season they produced. So, yeah, that was full of merit, even if it was overshadowed a touch by everything that happened as the players were walking off the ground.
Yep, absolutely. And one last highlight to put in, that Darcy Burns-Jones goal as well. Yeah, got to put that in there.
Yeah.
And this next segment is brought to you thanks to Skills Beast, who have been helping AFL players of all skill levels transform their kick. So who transformed their game for Port Adelaide in 2024? We have named Jace Burgoyne.
Yeah, plenty of honourable mentions. Mead was very good. Sweet obviously took the number 1 ruck mantle in the back end of the year. Horn Francis continued to develop. He was, he's a star in the making, and he just kept growing. But yeah, Jace Burgoyne only played 13 matches in the previous 2 seasons. Played 23 games this year, averaged 18 touches, so had the ball over 400 times for the season. And I reckon he was probably their best player in the finals across the 3 matches that they played, which is largely what this is based on. I think he showed enough to suggest that it was very much a breakout year, but that he's got a bright future.
Yep. All right, if there's one thing we know at Zero Hanger, it is headlines. And look, Port Adelaide are always in the headlines, and it's always for the same thing. I feel like this has been going on for a long time, and that is sort of the nature of why it does make this segment. But the debate around Ken Hinkley.
Yeah, and look, it's a 2-team city, and that puts a bit of pressure on. It's not like you've got Collingwood, Carlton, Essendon, and Richmond and Hawthorn cheering a city, and they're taking headlines off each other. It's Port or it's the Crows in the Advertiser and things like that over there. But look, Ken Hinkley been at the helm for 12 seasons. Port have been a pretty good side consistently over most of that time. But there is that debate around, do you need to make a grand final? Do you need to win a final? What's the pass mark this year to hang on to your job? It's different to most others because of the length of time that he's been there. So there is a bit of a ceiling that seemingly sits above them. And, there's always that belief that, or the debate is he the one that can smash them through that ceiling and get them there, and not a part of that will change going into this year. So it is a bit of weight that Port have to carry into every season.
Yeah, and of course it always gets taken to another level when you have little incidences like after the semi-final win against Hawthorn, I believe.
Correct.
Against Jack Ginnivan.
And there'll be some people at Port who love that because it's flying the flag and it's passion. They think, yes, beautiful, you're bleeding for the jumper. But there'll be the others that thinking, if James Sicily kicks that goal, you might have lost your job. It's an interesting one. So,
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So Port Adelaide never short of the headlines. All right, so the ins and outs for Port Adelaide this year. We've talked about who they gained, which is pretty good, but we'll start with who they lost. Charlie Dixon, great servant of the club, retiring, and Trent McKenzie as well.
Yeah, both ex-Gold Coast, the leg cannon, Trent McKenzie, could thump at an absolute mile. But he and Charlie Dixon called time down Houston, ends up at Collingwood. Some guys that were pretty good servants, like Tom Cleary over the years, Quinton Narkle, who we saw popped up at a third club, getting moved on. And I think their draft haul was pretty good. We were discussing that a little bit in our wrap, that Berry at 15, Whitlock, Moraes as well. I think they've done okay okay with the hand that they've gone to the draft with, Port. A pretty underrated draft period for them.
All right, so coming into 2025, what is their pass mark? Because I can't see them surviving just another year where they make finals but bow out before a prelim.
Yeah, there are a lot of sides that would love to have their record, but that status quo probably has to change. Port have been in that zone for long enough. It's admirable to be top four for as long as they've been. Brisbane went through that a few years ago where they kept finishing top four and then made a grand final and lost it, then made another grand final and won their flag. Port need to look at that type of blueprint and think that it can be done that way. But they keep running into one or two sides that are a little bit better than them. So it's not a huge gap they have to bridge, but they really do have to bridge it. You think that they're not going to put up with near-abouts for too much longer.
Yeah, so pass mark for 2025.
Grand final, probably.
Yeah. Well, that wraps it up for the season review for 2024 for Port Adelaide. Thank you, Darren. Just another classic year for the pair.
Yeah, we could have had this conversation 12 months ago, and I guess they'd be hoping we're not in a year's time. But, more of the same, but still those foundations there they can work with.
The same is pretty good.
Exactly.
A lot of teams would love to have that same. So thank you for watching. Jump into the comments section. Let us know how you think the power is positioned for next year. Subscribe to the YouTube channel, like the videos, and catch all the latest AFL news at zerohanger.com. This season review was brought to you by Skills Beast. Instantly kick better. Head to skillsbeast.com for more info.